I'm back from Sundance, but plot twist, that is not the topic of this video. Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, this is Impression Blend, and I heard you guys missed the wrap-ups, so I'm bringing them back. If you're new to my channel and you haven't seen one of these before, this is a video series where once a month I cover everything I watched and read in the past month. Depending on how much I have to talk about, I will often split what I read and what I watched into two separate videos, but for January, I'm doing it all in one. You will see why in a moment. Something I will not be covering in today's video is Sundance, even though technically half of it did happen at the end of January. I'm going to do a separate Sundance wrap-up, so we're just not going to worry about a million movies that I watched in 1 week. So let's just get right into this, and I'm going to start with the books. So a lot of you have noticed that I stopped making book videos in 2020. I think I only made 1 or 2, and I only made a couple of wrap-ups, so I didn't even talk about books and wrap-ups. And the biggest reason for that is that 2020 was a ridiculous reading slump for me. You would think, which is what I thought in the beginning of that quarantine that started in March, that I am going to read all of the books because I'm going to have so much free time. I was entirely wrong. Not only did I somehow have less time to read books, but also I just kept picking up book after book after book that just wasn't really sparking my interest. And because of that, I ended up in this huge reading slump that lasted pretty much the entire year. This is also why I ended up skipping my top 10 books of the year video or best and worst books of the year video, whatever I feel like doing. I didn't do one for 2020 because, to be honest, I only read 30 books last year, and I know for some people that sounds like a lot. For me, that is not a lot. 30 books is the lowest number of read books that I had since, I had to check this one, since 2013. So yeah, it was a bad reading year, and I felt like picking a top 10 out of 30, that's just a third of what I read, and that just made no sense for me. But finally, I am out of this reading slump. I think. I hope. So I will be talking about books again on my channel, including in wrap-ups, and we are starting today. Now, for the month of January, I only read 2 books, and I know you guys are going to be like, didn't you just say that you're out of the reading slump? I am. The reason I only read 2 books is just the first one was a giant, and that is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I am about 10 years late on this one, but finally read this giant novel, and of course, I loved it. Also, I can finally watch the series. This is how stubborn I am with this. The series came out, I don't even know in what year, a while ago, and people have been raving about it, but me saying, no, I have to read the book first, I waited this long, and I read it. So now I can watch it. If you don't know, this novel revolves around time travel. The main character goes back in time to try to stop the Kennedy assassination. It is explained in the beginning of the book why this is something that is important and why the idea is that if you stop that event from happening, there are going to be a lot of improvements in our life. At least that's the theory. A lot of bad things are not going to happen afterwards. It's explained why that particular event, but also there's a particular year that he goes back to. He doesn't really have a choice of how far in time he can travel. If there's anyone out there like me and you've been putting this off forever because this is a giant book or because you have been previously disappointed by the non-classic King, trust me, this is absolutely worth the hype and you need to read this. It is so interesting. It is so much fun. He doesn't waste time here. You jump right into it. There's a lot of information, a lot going on. One of the things that I really loved about this novel were the actual rules of time travel and how they related to the themes of the novel, because a lot of this revolves around fate and the divine plan, the idea of whether or not this exists, and the idea of whether or not time would be resistant to being changed. I haven't really seen that addressed in many time travel novels, and I found this to be a really cool way to approach things. Also, something a lot of people struggle with when it comes to Stephen King are his endings, and I have to say, this novel has a really good ending. Now, I'm not implying whether it's good as in it's a happy end or it's a not happy end. I just think the way the ending was written was excellent. I think this might be one of my favorite, if not the favorite, endings that Stephen King has come up with for his books. My only issue with this was somewhere around the middle, I think right past the half point of the book, because the pacing really slowed down for a little bit and there wasn't really much going on. But at the same time, Stephen King was building the characters, exploring more secondary plot lines, and I didn't ever lose interest. It's just that there was a part of this book where I started thinking about, I wish we would hurry up with this one and get to the more interesting stuff again. But I absolutely loved this, ended up giving this a 9 out of 10. So close to giving it a 10 out of 10. Definitely a Stephen King book that I absolutely recommend. So check this one out if you haven't yet, and if you have, let me know you thought about it in the comments below. The second book I read in January, continuing with the theme of popular series that I have not watched because I'm stubborn and wanted to read the book first, that is The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. I initially just was going to watch the series, but then I realized that the book was written by Walter Tevis, and I have been wanting to dive into this author for years, so I thought this was a great opportunity to do so, and I'm so happy that I read the book because I really, really enjoyed it. The story is about Beth, an orphan girl who discovers a love for chess, and soon turns out that she's actually a chess prodigy and is just beating anyone and everyone in chess. I was a little bit worried that the chess game descriptions themselves were going to be a bit much for me to enjoy because my knowledge of chess is very amateur and I don't really visualize chess games that well. But the way Walter Tevis writes this is amazing, and it makes you feel like you're really watching this game unfold, like it's something very exciting. And even though you may not exactly understand the moves that are happening on the board without actually seeing the board, it still somehow is a lot of fun. Also, the character of Beth is very interesting to read about. She's a flawed character. She has issues. She was given tranquilizers as a kid, so she is addicted to those. She's also not the best at forming relationships, friendships, all of that. And of course, this being said, in the past, I think it's 1960s. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the 60s. There's the whole issue of expectations from a girl, and oh my gosh, there's a girl playing chess, an unseen thing. So it is a very interesting book to read from multiple perspectives and from the perspective of just this character study that you don't really see very often. I am definitely very excited to watch the series now. Finally, I actually think I'm going to enjoy it more than the novel because I'm going to be able to see these games unfold, because eventually the chess games were kind of starting to get a little repetitive. So actually seeing those on screen, I am sure is going to improve my experience. Plus, I love Anya Taylor-Joy, and I think she's a wonderful choice for Beth. So absolutely cannot wait to watch the series. As for the book, as I mentioned, the chess sequences did start getting a little bit too much for me, and that was probably the main thing that kept me from absolutely loving this book. And I did feel like it was a little bit short. I wanted more. I wanted to know more about Beth, more about what happened to her as an adult. So I did really, really enjoy the book. Ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. I would absolutely recommend it, and do not be intimidated by the chess scenes. Also, cannot wait to read more Walter Tevis. I'm thinking about reading The Man Who Fell to Earth, but if you have other recommendations, please leave them in the comments because this is definitely an author I need to explore further. As for what I'm reading right now, instead of just taking something off my to-read list that keeps growing and growing, I am rereading the first Law trilogy, starting with The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie. Don't you guys think this edition looks awesome? I'm so happy that I upgraded my paperbacks to these special edition hardcovers because they look amazing. I talk about my love for Joe Abercrombie pretty often, and if you love dark fantasy and you haven't read any Joe Abercrombie, please pick up the first Law trilogy. You will not regret it. They are amazing books, and I think I might make a video on the entire trilogy once I'm done with my reread. Let me know if you'd like to see that. Now, onto the movies. I did not watch any series in January, believe it or not. Most of my time before Sundance was spent catching up on 2020 films that I missed, but I wanted to watch before I make my top 10 of 2020 list, which if you haven't seen it, I have it linked right here or in the info box below. But yeah, there are very few movies on here that are actually not from 2020. And if you don't know what I'm looking at, this is my Letterboxd account. If you don't follow me on Letterboxd, I am Impression Blend on there, just as I am everywhere else on social media. And this is where I log every single thing that I watch that is not an actual multi-season series. Even mini-series I log here. So if you want to keep up with what I'm watching, follow me on Letterboxd. Let's begin. The first movie I saw in January was Tiger Tail. A lot of people have compared this one to Minari. I haven't seen Minari, so I don't know if that comparison is fair. But just based on the description, I can see why people are comparing the two. Tiger Tail involves multiple timelines, and it revolves around a man who has immigrated from Taiwan to America in hopes of a better life, in hopes of eventually moving his mother to America and making sure she doesn't have to work for the rest of your life in a factory. How all of that plays out, you would have to watch the film, but it is heavily revolving around the immigrant experience and the idea of the American dream that people have when they come to the United States. I loved the film. My only complaint about it was that I thought it needed to be longer. There was so much more to explore there, but I feel like the filmmakers really captured that feeling of isolation and feeling like the odd person out when you move to a different country. Speaking from personal experience as an immigrant, I can say that this film really nailed the emotional state that you're in when you move away from a place where you grew up and where everything's familiar, and you move somewhere and it's not what you expected it to be, and then you're kind of just pushing forward trying to follow your initial idea that this is for the best. I thought this was an absolutely beautiful film. Obviously, I recommend it, ended up giving it an 8 out of 10, was one of the standouts of the year for me, for sure. Then I watched one of the most interesting documentaries of 2020, and that is The Painter and the Thief. This story is absolutely insane, and I kind of don't want to tell you much about it because it's just fun to discover it as you're watching it. I know I say that a lot about movies, but this one in particular, it just went places where I didn't expect it to go. The basic premise here is that it's about an artist, and 2 of her paintings get stolen, but the thieves are quickly identified because of the security cameras. She makes a choice to interact and actually talk to one of the thieves. The documentary unfolds from there, and it is a beautiful story that really makes you think about what it means to try to understand someone and what it means to see a person and to be seen. As people, we are more than the labels that are placed on us and labels that we place on ourselves. We are more than our circumstances. And that's why someone else seeing you for who you are can change your life. And that is the essence of this documentary. Absolutely recommend this one as well. I think many people would enjoy this, and it would resonate on different levels with different people. Ended up giving that one an 8 out of 10 as well. There was a point where it started feeling like it's losing its way, and it was getting a little bit predictable. Not that I'm saying that you should judge a story that is a real life story by whether or not it's predictable, but in its presentation, in a way that it was telling the story, it was kind of taking the obvious route. But overall, a fascinating story and really unlike anything I've ever seen or heard. Moving on to another documentary, and this is easily one of the best documentaries of 2020. I'm talking about Time, and that documentary and the way it ended absolutely floored me. The story revolves around a family and takes place over 2 decades. It's about a wife and a husband. The husband has been incarcerated. The documentary, of course, covers what happened. It mostly focuses on the justice system in the US and how frustrating it can be. It is obviously an emotional and powerful story, as you would expect. And the way that it wraps things up is not only powerful from the storytelling perspective, but also the way the ending is done just was amazing. I recommend this to pretty much everybody. And as I mentioned, one of the best documentaries I saw that came out of 2020, tackling some important and frustrating topics in a very clear way. Ended up giving this one a 9 out of 10. Then I watched Beanpole, which is a film I was really looking forward to see. This is a Russian film. It is set right after the end of World War II in St. Petersburg, back then Leningrad, and it is about 2 women who are trying to find a way to live again. Women who were at war and are now expected to return to normal society, which is, as you can imagine, pretty impossible. There's a lot of horrific stuff in this film. I was really interested in it because it is based on a book that I read in early 2020, coincidentally. It's called The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. It is an absolute must read to anyone who has interest in the experience of World War II. That one in particular is about how women participated in the war and how they felt afterwards. It's absolutely heartbreaking because they were seen as kind of damaged and unclean because a lot of people wanted to put the war behind them. So men did not want to marry women whom they were at war with. They wanted to marry someone who they considered pure and untouched by the horrors. And obviously that is just an awful thing on its own. What I'm trying to say is that even though the film Beanpole is inspired by that book, it really surprisingly doesn't dig into a lot of that at all. It kind of takes pieces here and there, but it doesn't really come together as cohesively as it could have. It is a beautifully looking film. It does touch on a lot of important and difficult topics, which is why I did end up giving it a pretty high rating, an 8 out of 10. I did think it was really good, but I struggled with certain aspects of it, which I unfortunately can't discuss because of spoilers. There were things about it that frustrated me, but it is not something I'm going to forget anytime soon. And it is a very effective way to start a conversation about something that doesn't get discussed very often. So definitely a recommendation from me, an 8 out of 10, but be aware that it doesn't exactly nail what it's trying to do. After that, I took a bit of a break from 2020 stuff and randomly decided to watch Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, which is a film about a woman recovering, so to speak, from being in a cult and the psychological effects of a cult on a person. I thought it was fascinating. I thought this in-depth look at the psychological effects of being a part of a cult is just a must-watch for anyone who has an interest in cults and in films about cults. Elizabeth Olsen is fantastic in this film. I love watching her outside of the MCU. I think she is such a talented actress that has so much to offer. It is a bit of a niche interest story and it doesn't really deliver its punches the way that you would expect, but I thought it was a very powerful film, and once again, obviously would recommend. Ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. Next, I watched another documentary. I am always looking for good documentaries to watch, and this one I heard a lot of good feedback about. I heard it is amazing, and I'm talking about Collective. This is about the aftermath of a fire in a Romanian club where the burn victims started dying in hospitals from wounds that weren't really supposed to kill them. They were dying from infections. And this is an incredible piece of investigative journalism. It is frustrating. It is sad. It is fascinating from a perspective of how could this possibly be happening? Sadly, things like this don't really surprise me. That has nothing to do with my rating. It's just part of my experience with this documentary. What has to do with my rating is that I do feel like it is a little bit dry and a little bit one note in a way. It's very detailed and it's very thorough, and I absolutely admired it for that, but it just kind of seemed to be working with the same thing and just going over and over the same idea, not really building it into any kind of arc. And the way it ends is pretty much, it just ends. So while I did really appreciate the investigative journalism of it all and how thoroughly they approached the topic, I didn't exactly love it. Ended up giving it a 7 out of 10. I would still recommend it if it sounds interesting to you and if you do enjoy investigative journalism documentaries. After that, I got started on the Small Axe films. There's a total of 5. I only watched 2 because these 2 were the most discussed and the ones that a lot of people were considering the best ones out of 5. I definitely want to continue watching, but as I was catching up on things, I wanted to watch these 2 first. And as you can tell, that is Mangrove and Lover's Rock. I really, really enjoyed Mangrove. I thought it was beautifully done. I thought there were so many interesting and infuriating aspects to the story. I wasn't familiar with the historical events there, so it was definitely very educational. I loved that we got to spend time with the characters before all the procedural stuff started, and we really got to learn about their daily lives and their struggles and who they were as people. And then the courtroom drama aspect kicks in, and it is so well done. I can completely understand why this is compared to the trial of the Chicago 7, because in concept, it is pretty similar. It is a true story about people known as the Mangrove 9 and the trial that happened in 1970. People seem to be taking sides whether they like the trial of the Chicago 7 or Mangrove. I don't think that's necessary. I think both films are wonderful, and that comes down to personal preference. The trial of the Chicago 7 is a little bit more conventionally entertaining. It's a little bit more fun to watch. Mangrove is also amazing, but it approaches its topic a little bit differently, and it shows certain things differently. Like I said, it explores its characters better, but from the entertainment perspective, it's not as fun. Not that that's necessary, but it all comes down to personal preference. I thought it was great. I thought the performances were amazing. I really wish that they would nominate this for the Academy Awards. I think it would have been a major contender. Yeah, obviously would highly recommend. 8 out of 10, probably a 9 out of 10 to be honest. I may change my rating on this one. Now, as for Lover's Rock, this really was not my thing, unfortunately. I, as you might remember, struggle with slice of life type of films, and this one is just a party. I think if you really connect with this party, maybe this is a time that you were alive and you experienced parties similar to this one, maybe then this is fantastic to you. But for me, it's just not my cup of tea, unfortunately. I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10 because I think it is as good as it can get with a film like this. But for me personally, I got honestly a little bit bored watching it. I don't really care to watch people party for the entire film without any actual plot. So that was not really for me, but from the artistic perspective, from how everything was presented, from the style of it, I thought it was great. So I ended up stopping somewhere in the middle with a 6 out of 10. Then I watched Beasts Clawing at Straws, which is a very stylish South Korean thriller. And you guys know I love South Korean thrillers. This is one of my favorite things in general. I just think they're so well done, and this was no exception. This was one of those puzzle pieces type of thrillers where you have a lot of different plot lines, a lot of different characters coming together eventually for a full picture, and it is a really fun experience as you're figuring it out and you're putting it all together. And this is a feature film debut from Kim Young-hoon. I think that's how you say his name. I apologize if I'm wrong, but this is so impressive as a debut feature. I think we're going to remember this name for a long time. Cannot wait to see what this guy does next. As far as the story goes, it revolves around a man who works at a sauna and finds this bag full of cash in a locker room. And then different people come into this story and you kind of figure out where this bag came from. What is the result of taking this bag or not taking this bag? I don't want to say anything once again because it's fun to put this one together on your own. But if you do like South Korean thrillers, you do not want to miss this one. Absolutely give it a watch. I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. Gave a lot of 8 out of 10s in January. Apparently I'm seeing this now. This is not normally the case, but here we are. Then another documentary. This one is Boys State. I have heard a lot of people mention this one as one of the best documentaries of the year. And I have to say, this documentary gave me hope and also terrified me at the same time. I had no idea these Boys State things even existed. And it was very interesting to learn about how these things work and about how people's logic works within those. It's basically about these high school boys in Texas who are brought together to build a government and to see how they can function within this political system that is kind of an experiment, and it is something else. I absolutely recommend this to anyone who has the slightest interest in politics, which most people do at this point. So this is a very eye-opening and interesting watch. Ended up giving this one, you guessed it, an 8 out of 10. It was really, really good. Now, after all of that, I knew that Sundance was fast approaching and I really wanted to take a break from all of these movies that I was watching intensely, trying to figure out what gets on my list, what doesn't get on my list. So I decided to watch some favorites. The first one of which was Rocket Man. This is one of my favorite feel-good movies. I'm really finding that this is one of my favorite movies of all time in general, just for when I feel that I need a pick-me-up and I just need to forget everything and enjoy myself. Watch Rocket Man. I love the music. I love the performances. I have a separate review for it and I gave it a 9 out of 10. Yet again, I think this is my 4th time watching it, something like that. Amazing film if you haven't seen it. I also rewatched The Vast of Night. If you've seen my top 10 of 2020, you have heard of this film already, and I'm not going to talk about it again. I have a quick review of it in that video, so go check that one out if you haven't. But yeah, this one I just wanted to revisit because I wanted a good story told to me and I just wanted something simple and enjoyable. And for some reason, I was in the mood for this one, which is how you know this is one of my favorites. 8 out of 10, as you can tell, a really, really cool, small indie sci-fi film. And finally, the last movie I watched before I got into all of the Sundance stuff was Silver Linings Playbook. This is another one of these films that I watch when I just want something to make me feel good and make me feel happy. It is definitely a comfort watch for me. And I love this movie. It's a romantic comedy, but also a drama. It's unusual. It is interesting. Also, obviously, one of my favorites. I've seen it many, many times. Ended up giving it a 9 out of 10. once again, have not changed my rating since the first time I saw it. And that is it for this wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed coming back to this format, and I'm very excited to do this once a month again. The Sundance wrap up is going to happen pretty soon, but that's not going to be my next video. I'm going to do some Sundance coverage first for specific films, for my favorite films that I saw at the festival. So look forward to that. I think I have some very exciting films to share with you that you should keep an eye out for. But at the end of all that, I'm going to do a ranked wrap up for everything that I watched at Sundance. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. A special thank you to all of my patrons, with an extra special thank you to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now. But of course, I appreciate every single one of you for making it to the end of this long video. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this video, which I really hope you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos, follow me on social media. All of the links and information are in the info box below, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.